Over 10 years since Thrustmaster's last Cougar Viper throttle, the Viper TQS throttle Quadrant system, an official US Air Force branded and replica of the famous F-16 Fighting Falcon throttle grip unit, sized 1:1 with the real deal, with a 16-bit Hall effect sensor for the primary axes, USB-C connector, and as always, full disclosure, I was sent the unit for free for the purposes of review. So this is going to be something of a first impressions and a review light. I've had the unit now for about 1 week and a half, although lacking drivers for a while. And you are going to need them, because without it you're going to find all the neutral positions on your switches do not report a key press, which is a slight issue given it means you get stuck in different modes. And speaking of which, the idle cutoff, which is accessed by pulling a lever and rotating the handle up, you will receive a key command when you go into the axes but not when you come out, which is a bit of a shame. It means that you need to have a control binding specifically for if in cutoff, else idle. So a slight incompatibility issue there. I hope they add that in the software in the future. My drivers are currently, should we say, work in progress, pre-release, so I can't say for certain what the final features will be like. And of course we can flow forwards to our Afterburner and rotate the handle and push into Afterburner. There's no need for the grabby latch on this one. Now on the axes rail itself, you've got the ability to remove the detent should you fancy. These two bolts here can come out and you can pull this entire section out. Now the only criticism I got of this axis is the noise it makes here. If I run it back and forth, you can hear the caster running on the metal there, whereas it's silent elsewhere, which is a little odd, but not really a huge deal. The other thing is you can adjust the friction of your axes. If I flip it around, on the back you'll find an Allen key built into the whole case. And this goes about here, and you can tighten or adjust a bolt that lets you change the friction. Too loose, the throttle will droop back down to idle or Afterburner. Too tight, and it'll start to stick on you a little bit. But you can get a good wide range of feelings to suit your personal need. Now, as far as the actual throttle itself goes, with terms of precision and how it feels, this is really good. It's got a nice dampened feeling to it. It doesn't stick. It doesn't feel like it's going to keep going. It stops when you stop. And it's very precise in my experience when dealing with, say, air-to-air refueling, where you really do need those very small, repeated adjustments to get your position just right. Even on my first go at refueling, I did a reasonable job of it. I'm really quite liking this axis. It feels really good. In addition to the handle, we have at the top a slap switch, which is of course your countermeasures panic switch. Now all you have to do is say oh no, missiles have been launched, you just go and pull the throttle back to idle and you've got your countermeasures pouring out of the jet. Now as you probably noticed, if you're just a little bit too enthusiastic, the whole unit is going to tip on you. The base is actually really light. It's much lighter than a Thrustmaster Warthog, for example. It doesn't have the weighted plates on the side. It is constructed of aluminium on the handle, I believe, and the sidewall is metal, but a lot of this is actually plastic. The runners on here are metal, but this button panel, for example, is largely plastic with the metal side plates. Thrustmaster do have a tabletop clamp and a desk mount available, and they're compatible with this base. I can't say for third parties just yet. They probably have to design something new because it looks like a new arrangement. So if you are very vigorous with that button, I would consider strongly getting a mount for it. If you're gentle, it's not too much of a problem. But you can see even it wants to tip, so be mindful of that one. So moving on then, we'll look at the handle itself, and this is really nice. Now there's a nice lovely smooth bearing kind of feel to these switches, and they're nice and clicky, they're good quality. I don't have any concerns or worries about the quality. They feel like they're going to last a long time. The design is pretty much one-to-one with the real deal. You've got the same antenna, man range, dogfight, speed brake, and the cursor. And if you look closer at the cursor, you'll see that we have a little nook on the top and the bottom here. Your thumb will rest quite nicely in there, and you can reach the antenna elevation pretty much perfectly. So you've got this groove, you line your thumb up, and the middle position of the antenna is here, which is fantastic ergonomics. Now Thrustmaster have thought about this, that's why these nooks exist. When you move the controller, it's very easy to get confused as to what way is up, but thanks to those two grooves, you rest your thumb on it, you now know that is up, that is down, and if we look at it from here, it's up, down, but if we go all the way down to idle, suddenly it's left for up and right for down. So a little bit of weirdness and a very clever little trick on the cursor to improve your accuracy there. And on the far side you've got the radio control switch. Where it diverges from reality though is the antenna elevation has a push. It's a nice little extra no impact addition, and there is an additional scroll wheel here. And coming pre-bound for DCS, you'll find this bound to your zoom. You move it right for zoom in and left for zoom out, and you can push it in to reset your zoom, and this is going to be your primary means of controlling your zoom. This is a free position button, not an axis however. And there's a reason for that, and that's because the base down here, this button panel, is in fact optional. You can buy the unit without the base, and this little slider axis, which is what I've always used for my zoom control on the Thrustmaster Warthog, is very small. You can't reach it. There's no way you're getting your thumb down there to reach that control without taking your hand off, which is a bit of a shame. I would have liked to have seen that longer so you could reach it. In fact, I may even 3D print a piece to go on here and extend it up to about there, so I can reach it without having to take my hand off the throttle, because I generally prefer an axis for my zoom if possible. And lastly, on the underside of the handle, they've got a pinky paddle. We see it here. And this is a bit awkward. You see, it kind of goes where your pinky will rest and catches your fingers, and I'm not entirely sure if I like it or not yet. You find yourself kind of either resting your finger on it or trying to tuck your finger under, and it gets in the way a little bit of the otherwise superb ergonomics of the handle, which, I don't know, long term I might pull this handle off, the switch off, and see if I can just press the button itself rather than the lever pressing the button. But over time I've started to adjust to it. I think it's not as bad as I first thought, but that's one to think about. So back onto that base then. So like I said, it's an optional addition. You can install it or remove it from the base. And it's got a selection of switches you'll find in the cockpit of an F-16. The landing gear is a little plasticky and wobbly, but it's got a catch on it. You're not going to press it by accident. It's got a lift, so it's a safed switch. Moving down the base, we've got various controls. So at the top we have our master arm, our countermeasures program selector, and our countermeasure program mode selector. These are quite heavy. I find these really stiff. You're not going to press them by accident, that's for sure. But you may find yourself struggling to rotate them, or if you've got a slightly awkward grip, say as a result of your throttle being in the way above it, you may find yourself having a little difficulty pressing those down. The same goes for the switches back here. This is the TACAN, NAV and ILS selector. This one's not so bad because you've got that flat surface to grab on and rotate it, so it's much easier to turn. And in typical Thrustmaster fashion, they've also got quite heavy switches in general. These switches here you'll find are pretty comparable to the Warthog base, where they put up enough resistance. They're quite stiff, but they're on the upper end of what I consider just right. You won't press them by mistake, they don't feel cheap, they've got some resistance, and they're not too hard to press, but they are stiffer than a typical switch. You've also got the search, active power, altitude and power system for the RWR down here, which is kind of handy to have. I'm not entirely certain if I'll bind them as they are labelled. I might put the offset controls, for example, instead of the act/power button. And this is where it's a little bit odd, to be honest. The panel doesn't line up with the cockpit too much, as the Cat 1 and 3 switch is down here. But the master arm is here, and the laser arm is down here beneath Cat 1 and 3, and these should all be up here somewhere, really. And they've also got a jammer switch, which, that's not really how the aircraft works. I'm a little confused why they put that there, given that it's controlled with the CMS hat on the joystick. Along the bottom you've got your heading control and autopilot controls. So we've got the altitude hold, everything's like the heading and steering selector. Now this all works great. There's no serious complaints in the base, it's just these two knobs are too stiff. They sometimes, you just can't get the grip on it and you struggle to rotate it, and that's a little bit of a nuisance, but you don't need to change them too often, thankfully. So overall, I'm honestly quite happy with this. I've had, like I said, a couple of weeks now to play with it. It feels fantastic. It's still a bit of a work in progress. Like I said, the drivers aren't functioning, so things like these lights here, I don't know if they're going to sync or not, they might. And there's also the lights under here, these indicator lights. Now, I don't know what they're for. These can each individually light up, I believe, but I can't configure them in the software at the time of writing. So hopefully we'll see some cool features or light synchronization with the sims in the future with that, but for the moment they are just idle. You can also configure the backlight and that's supposed to be done by pressing a combination, I think it was the power button and the heading knob. This isn't ideal, because if you're flying in the sim and you want to adjust it, you're going to turn your radar warning receiver off. But outside the sim it means you should be able to adjust it, but my drivers don't do what they say they should in the manual just yet. Again, work in progress, pre-release. So overall, I'm really quite pleased with this so far. And I'm definitely going to be getting a lot more flying hours with it as I fly the F-16 a bit more. There's a small caveat: if you decide to fly the JF-17, this manual range switch is a free position switch in that aircraft, otherwise it's more or less the same. Now you can get by on that by binding, say, the antenna elevation, manual range push, and then the radio push. That'll just about do the job really. Or you might want to try taking the speed brake switch and using that, sorry not speed brake, the zoom wheel and using that. Of course this also works really well in VR, you can use it to zoom in and out with the VR and even reset your VR by pushing it if you fancy. Personally I want to use the scroll axes if I can, and I'm probably going to 3D print something to raise that up so I can reach it like this. But we'll have to see how we go. And of course I'm sure you all want to see how the Thrustmaster compares to Winwing's own offering of the F-16 handle. Now they are both very similar. I will say right now that the Thrustmaster's got the edge on quality of switches and axes feel. The Winwing has a more flexible base and actually has more travel on their axes. But we'll save the full thoughts for that on another video. So overall I'm pretty happy with the unit as a whole. Pre-orders should be starting around the 23rd of August, so not long now. So I hope you've enjoyed, and take care. I'll leave you to the sound of switches.